Welcome back, everyone. This is another Chris course with your host Chris, and in this episode we are going to be covering authentication with Node.js, express.js, and also a framework called Passport.js. So what is authentication, you may be wondering? Well, authentication is basically proving that we are a particular person. We're proving that we own a particular account. So GitHub, for instance, if we were to authenticate with GitHub, we would enter our username and password, sign in, and if our username and password match up with a row in the database, well, we are proving that we own our particular account, and we are therefore authenticated and authorized to visit particular pages that we might not have access to otherwise. We're able to view repos that we created, able to edit these repos, private repos at least, and that is the whole point of authentication, to prove that we own a specific account. So kind of give you a better idea of how this works, I have a database open over here. And if I were to type in a username and password here in these fields and click sign in, well, GitHub would go ahead and compare this username with the username over in the database, and would also compare this password with the password over here in the database as well. And it would only authenticate us, it would only give us access to particular pages, or specific repos or private repos, if both the username and password match up with one of the rows over here. And since neither of these match up, well, we won't be authenticated, we'll just be redirected back to this GitHub screen, and we won't be able to access any of our repos. So that's the whole point of authentication, to give us access to stuff that we might not have access to otherwise. We're proving that we're a particular person, we're proving we own a particular account. Now, the whole process of actually integrating authentication into an app is actually quite confusing, I would say, for the beginner. I know I had a lot of trouble learning this at first, and there are not many tutorials out there that I feel do a good job of actually helping you understand the process behind this from a high-level standpoint and a low-level standpoint of actually integrating this within a Node app. So that is what I'm hoping to fix within this tutorial, is how to show you guys not only how to implement this within a Node app from scratch, but also to give you guys a good high-level understanding of how authentication works in the first place. Because let's say you don't want to use Node, you don't want to use Express, you want to use something like Laravel or some other kind of MVC framework. Well, if you know the high-level concepts, you should have a much easier time integrating the whole authentication process into one of those other frameworks. So without further ado, let's go ahead and cover the process really quickly from a high-level standpoint. And when I'm referring to high level, all I mean is we are looking at things from an overhead view. We're not actually delving deep into the code just yet. We are looking at the steps we need to take from an overall standpoint, not the detailed standpoint. So in order to integrate authentication into a Node or Express app, the first thing we are going to do is add our boilerplate. So we are going to clone a repo, an Express repo that I've customized for my specific liking. This repo contains a few extra customizations that I'd like to use within my everyday app development, such as Webpack. It makes use of MySQL. I like to connect to a MySQL database rather than Mongo, it's just preference, and a few other optimizations in there as well. This way I'm not going back and re-adding all these optimizations every time I create a new Express project. I just have them all ready to go because I can clone them with this express.cc repo. So once we clone our repo, we're then going to install all of our dependencies running yarn or npm. But when it comes to authenticating a user, proving that a user exists within a database, there are a few things that we need to do. And the first thing we need to do is create a new user in the database. So referencing GitHub, we need to prove that the information here matches up with the information over here. So we can't actually prove that this information matches up over here if we don't have a user in the database in the first place. So that's going to be the first step, is we want to create a user in the database for us to compare our user's input to. So that'll be our first step, and we are going to cover all these individual steps to get that working. We need to create a form within a view, create a route that'll process the form's post request. We need to create a database connection, grab the form input, and then actually insert it into a database, and then make sure that our data is actually what we want it to be. We want to make sure that our data has integrity to it, that we're actually inserting data corresponding to our business rules. We want to add validation to our input on the back end and front end. We want to hash users' passwords, and then we want to store the user in the database finally. Finally, we're going to store a valid user in the database. So that's a lot, but don't worry, guys. We are going to cover this every step of the way. I'm going to help you understand exactly what you're going to need to know so you can understand this from a detailed standpoint and a high-level standpoint. So once we have a new user in the database, we want to log our user in. And we're going to log our user in using a framework called Passport, which we'll cover more in the future episode. This is going to be a lot of what we're covering within this episode because there's so much to cover. But in the next episode, I would like to at least get to the Passport session where we can understand what Passport is, how to integrate it within an app, and why we'd want to use it in the first place. So once we log in our user, we then want to create protected routes so that only logged in users can access certain pages. So let's say that we have a dashboard that we only want logged in users to access. Well, that is where this whole protected route thing will come in, and combined with Passport, we can ensure that only logged in users can access particular pages. We want to create a log out button so users can log out, and we also want to create a login page so users can log back in. So this is the process, guys. If you'd like to view this process, just look in the description of the video. And let's go ahead and get started with adding our boilerplate up here. So to add our boilerplate to a project, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cd to a directory which we'd like to store most of our web projects in. So I like to store most of my web projects in a directory called web. And I'm going to run git clone, and to get the actual repo for this, you're going to want to access this link right here, which is also in the description. So we are going to hit clone or download. We are going to take this link right here, and we are going to run git clone. Actually, let's see. Yes, we're going to run git clone express.js, and it's going to clone all of this repo's content into a directory called express.js. So once we have that cloned up, we can list out all of our files, and you'll see that we now have a directory called express.js. So let's go ahead and cd into that. Look at our content, and then we want to open this up in Sublime Text. So I have a custom alias in terminal, which allows me to type something like sublime, and it'll open up my project in Sublime Text. Now, in order to get your project opened up in Sublime Text, you probably don't have this alias with you, so go ahead and type open dot in your terminal, and you can go ahead and grab your project directory and drag it right on top of your Sublime Text icon, and it'll open it up same way as before, same way as I just opened it using the Sublime method right here. Alright, so now that we have our default boilerplate, you can see that this is expressed with a few customizations, a few optimizations that I like to use within my everyday project. So you'll see that we have things such as Webpack. We are using Webpack to compile our SAS, make use of ES6. We're also using it for browser sync so that we can refresh the page automatically whenever we make a change to one of our files. We already have SQL in here. We have a MySQL connection so that our app is connected to a MySQL database rather than something like Mongo. This is just preference. I do a lot of PHP and WordPress development as well, so I like to make sure that I'm only using one type of database, and my database of choice is MySQL. You'll also see we're making use of environment files, and within views we are using the handlebars templating system with a few partials that I've custom made just for my app development project. So I'm always going to have a header, I'm always going to have a footer. I want to make sure that these are always here whenever I use Express, because the default version of Express does not have a header or footer. They just have this index file, which is not very helpful for me. I just like making sure that all this stuff is ready to go before I'm even ready to start developing. Alright, so you can see that we have some default boilerplate. We'll keep explaining some of these files along the way as we go about needing them. But now if we look back at, if we look back at our process, you can see that we just finished number 1, so let's go ahead and mark this off. We now need to run yarn or npm install to install all of our project's dependencies. So if we look within our package.json file, you'll see that we have a bunch of dependencies and dev dependencies. And some of these I've custom added in order to ensure that our app is working right off the bat. And these are all things that we require for our project to work and for our project to be developed. So in order to get all of these installed, all we are going to do is open up our terminal. We are either going to run yarn or npm install. Both will do the same thing. It all depends on which package manager you like to use. So I like to use yarn as my package manager. So to install all of these dependencies, all you have to do is type yarn, hit enter, and yarn will go ahead and install all of these packages for you. Alright, so once those finish installing, we can now run a few commands which we'll use in order to get our app running in the browser. So in order to get our app running in the browser, we need to first start our node server. And to start my node server, I'm going to use a package called nodemon. And all you have to do is type nodemon in the terminal and press enter. and it'll start your Node app up so you can visit a particular URL in the browser and your app will show up. Now, it should be noted that NodeMon is a global npm package, which means I already have it installed. So if you don't have NodeMon installed, simply type it into Google, look for npm install, and run that npm install global script within your terminal over here. As soon as you run that npm install script for NodeMon, it'll give you access to this global NodeMon command, which you can run within our express.js directory, and it'll get you right where I am right now. We'll have NodeMon running in the terminal. And what NodeMon does is whenever we make a change to a node.js file, NodeMon will restart our node server automatically, which means that we don't have to keep going over here and doing something like npm start each time we make a change to one of our files. That's just inefficient, which is where NodeMon comes into play. So we are going to run NodeMon, and then we are going to open up a new tab in our terminal just by pressing Command T. So once you have a new tab open, we are going to cd back to our directory called express.js, and then we want to run Webpack. And what this is going to do, it's going to fire up Webpack, which will allow us to make use of things such as SAS, ES6, and browser sync. So let's see what happens when we run Webpack in the terminal. Alright, so you'll see that Webpack is actually throwing an error. And if we read this, it's saying missing environment variables, db host, db user, db password, db name. And this is all related to these .env files. So .env stands for an environment file. And these environment files are to ensure that we have different credentials based on which development environment we are using. Not development environment, but which kind of environment are we using? Are we using a development environment? Are we using a production environment? Are we using a staging environment? That's the whole point of these environment files. So let's go ahead and look this one by one. Let's start off with .env.default. This is what's going to be stored in our Git repo. We are always going to store our .env.default because we need a comprehensive list of keys that are required for our app to work. So we are saying that we need a node_.env file to indicate which node environment are we in. Are we in a production environment? Are we in a development environment? And then we need to indicate that in order for our app to work, we also need a database host, a database user, a database password, and database name. So like I said, .env.default is always going to be stored in our Git repo. We always want to track this because we always want to know which individual environment keys do we need in order for our app to work. Now we are never going to set anything within this default file. Whenever we want to set something, we are going to do it within this .env file instead. So this right here, this is never tracked by Git or version control. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure that everything in here is as safe as can possibly be. We want to make sure that anything within our environment file is not available for public visibility. So it should also be noted that since we will be having different environments based on whether we're on development or production server, we will have different .env files for each. So if we are ready to deploy to production, we will create a .env file on that production server, and we'll change out the database host, user, and password correspondingly for that particular server. So since we are working in development, we can keep this right here, but we need to specify a database host, a database user, and a database password, and also a database name. So in order to choose a database host, we are going to put local, our database user is going to be root, our database password is going to be root, and our database name, let's just go with express.js because that is the name of our app. And save that, and we should almost be good to go. So local root and root, these are some defaults that come with MySQL when you install it with MAMP. So if you haven't heard of MAMP before, MAMP is a program that'll spin up a PHP server and a MySQL server on your computer. So if you don't have MySQL installed on your computer, you can just go ahead and download MAMP, and as soon as you start the server, it'll go ahead and run a MySQL server on your local computer. And once you have this up and running, what you can do is you can access this local database using a program such as SQL Pro. If you're looking for a program to access a MySQL database, I cannot recommend SQL Pro enough. It's by far the fastest and the easiest to use program for manipulating and accessing databases. I've used things such as phpMyAdmin, command line tools, and I have not found anything that really beats out the speed of SQL Pro, so I'd recommend that. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this for now. And I want you to go ahead and download SQL Pro. Go ahead and pause the video, download SQL Pro, and also download MAMP if you don't have it already. Spin up the MySQL server, and once you have all that in place, you'll see that I already have MAMP downloaded and I have MySQL server running because I clicked the start button right here. Once you have those in place, we'll go ahead and open up SQL Pro. Alright, so in order to get logged into MySQL, the MySQL server that we have running thanks to MAMP, in order to log in, we're going to head on over to Socket. The name for this is going to be local because this is a local server. Our username is going to be root, and our password is going to be root. And with that in place, we can go ahead and connect, and now you'll see we have access to a ton of different databases, local databases on our server, our MySQL server. So we want to create a new database, which we specified within Sublime Text, our environment file. We want to create a new database called express.js. So to create a new database within SQL Pro, all we need to do is hit this drop down right here and click Add Database. And this is going to be called express-c. See, I keep typing CSS. It's second nature to me by now. So our database is going to be called express-cc. We're going to add this, and now we have a MySQL database in place. So perfect. Let's go ahead and save this environment file over here. And now if we run Webpack like we were trying to before, let's see what happens. Alright, so you'll see Webpack is running successfully, and not only that, it opens up a tab for us automatically thanks to browser sync, and you'll see that you might have saw that we had a little browser sync notification up here. What this is saying is our app is connected to browser sync. So whenever we make a change to one of our handlebars files or one of our other files such as home.js or a style file such as style.scss, the page is going to be reloaded automatically for us. And we can test this out by looking into our index and deleting this h1 here. Let's go ahead and save that. You'll see that the page is automatically reloaded without the need for us to do anything. So that's a cool little nifty feature that I have included within my Express customization repo that we have here. Alright, so let's head back on over to our process sheet. You'll see that we ran yarn and npm install, and we are done with adding our boilerplate. So the next step is going to be creating a new user in the database. And let's see how far we can get within the limited amount of time that we have. Let's go ahead and create a form within a view. So to create a form within a view, let's go ahead and open up our browser. This is where we are right now. So all the content right here is being displayed in the browser. You'll see that we're pulling in our header, and our header code is over here. Our footer is over here. These are just references to the code within our header and the code within our footer. So for authentication, we want to create a form in which we can register a user within our database. So the first thing we need to do is create an actual form. So we can go ahead and get rid of this text. Actually, let's go ahead and keep it for title purpose sakes right now. Let's go ahead and create a form beneath it. And this form is going to have a few inputs. This form is going to have a username input, type of text, username. It's going to have email input and a password input. So let's just start off with the username for now. You'll see that refresh the page automatically. And now we have a field in which the user can input information, but this is kind of an ugly looking field. So let's at least get this a little better looking than it is now using Bootstrap. So to get Bootstrap, I'm going to open up a new tab and search for Bootstrap. And I'm going to click Bootstrap 4. And I'm going to copy just the styling with a Bootstrap CDN. So I'm going to copy this first line of code right here, head back on over to our app, go into header, and I'm going to create a new link tag. Actually, the link tag is already there for us, so we can just paste this in directly, and now we have access to all of the Bootstrap styling that is present within this Bootstrap file. So in order to make use of this styling, we need to head back on over to our index.handlebars file, and we need to add some classes to our input field. So the classes for a Bootstrap form, the classes we need in order to make sure that our Bootstrap form is good looking, is under documentation. We want to search for forms and scroll down until we hit some code here. So you'll see that this code right here, the classes and so forth, they all reference the nice looking styles that we have up here in this example. So we want to make sure that our fields are looking like this email address field, this password field right here. And in order to do that, we're just going to copy the first two form groups like so. And we are going to paste them within the form of our own. So let's go ahead and full screen this so we can see it a little better. And we are going to beautify things so all of our indentation is of the right spacing. Space things out a bit for easy readability. And you'll see that if we save this and view things in the browser, we should have at least some nice looking forms somewhere over here. Let's refresh. And you'll see that we're not actually seeing anything as of yet. We don't really see any Bootstrap styling. And that is because there is one caveat with the whole browser sync thing and NodeMon. Whenever you make a change to a file in the partials, you do have to restart NodeMon manually in order for it to take effect. So you'll see that we add this style sheet right here. In order for this to take effect, we need to restart NodeMon manually. And I have not figured out why exactly that is at the moment and how to alleviate that, but that is definitely something I would look forward to fixing in the future. But for now, let's just go ahead and restart it manually. To restart NodeMon, we're going to cancel out of it by pressing Control-C. And then we're going to type NodeMon back into the terminal. And now that we're rerunning NodeMon, if we refresh the page, you'll see that now our Bootstrap styles are taking effect because we reloaded the header, our header partial, which was not being loaded previously. So you'll see here that the spacing between the left and right hand sides of our screen is kind of tight. So let's go ahead and add everything into a container, like so. And we'll indent our code really quickly. Browser sync will take effect, and now we have everything nicely centered inside of a container, so a lot better looking than it was before. So we want to make sure that we're filling out all the fields we'll need to register a user. So to remember that this is a registration page, let's go ahead and change this title text right here. We are within index.handlebars, and this title text is being pulled from our index.js route file. And you'll see that we're passing through a title of express, but let's go ahead and call this registration. And I don't think that browser sync took effect on that one. Let's go ahead and refresh it manually. You'll see that this is going to be the registration page, and instead of welcome to registration, let's just go ahead and delete this text altogether. So we'll head back on over to index.handlebars, delete this paragraph text, and now we have a registration page. Cool. So in order to register a user, it's usually good to have a username, an email address, and some password fields. Not just one password field, but two password fields, because we want to make sure that the user is typing the correct password in both the first and the second time to ensure that their password is what they thought it was. So correspondingly, we are going to create some input. This is going to be a text input with a name of username. So you'll see that we have a username input right here, but we want to make sure that it's taking the Bootstrap class. So we need to make sure that we're grabbing a class of form control and we're pasting it within this input that we just created. You'll see now we have a Bootstrap input as so. Now we also want to make sure that we have a placeholder for this and a label. So we'll just go ahead and grab the email forms label and we're going to recall this username. This is going to be for the username input. So now we have a field for the username, and let's go ahead and add a placeholder to this as well. Equal username. We'll go ahead and get rid of the email input that's in the same form group. You'll see that we have a field for username and password right now. So we still need a field for our email, and we still need a field for our other password. Let's just go ahead and duplicate what we just created for our username 3 times, and we'll get rid of the password field that was supplied by Bootstrap. All right, so we have 4 username fields, but we now need an email field. This is going to be a type of email. And the placeholder is going to be email. So then we need a password field. This is going to be password. This is going to be for the password input. Excuse me. And it should be noted that this email label should be for the email input below. So change that up while you can. So the input for our password field is going to be a type of password. Its name is going to be password. and its placeholder is going to be password as well. So now for this field below it, let's just go ahead and copy what we just created here, because we are going to be creating another password field. We can get rid of the one beneath it like so. Alright, so now we have a username, an email address, and 2 password fields. So the second password field is going to be re-enter password, so that we can ensure that the user is creating a password that matches up with their original expectation. And the name for this is going to be a little different. We're just going to say this is going to be called password match. And the placeholder, not the placeholder, the name for this input is going to be called password match as well. So we have all of our form fields in place, but now we just need an actual submit button, so that once we click submit, we are posting a request to our server, and our server is going to then create a user in our database based on all of the fields that we have over here. So to create a button, we can reference our Bootstrap documentation, and let's see what they are doing to create their own submit button down here. If we look at the code at the bottom of this, you'll see that they have a button at the very end. We are just going to copy this if we can. Let's see, yep, there we go. We're going to copy this and throw it in at the bottom of our form. So now you'll see we have a submit button, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. But if we click this, nothing is happening at the moment. We don't actually have an action or a method within our form element up here, so that is going to be the next step. We want to make sure that we're submitting all of our form data to our particular route for processing. So we are going to specify that our method is going to be a post method, and that our action is going to go to a register page. So now whenever we click submit, we are going to go to a register page, but since we don't have any route handling specifically for our register page, nothing is happening. We're just being returned with a 404 error, because that is how Express works. If it does not find a matching route, it's going to return a 404 page. So to create a matching route, we are going to head on over to index.js, and you'll see that we only have one route available, and that is for our root, our index. So whenever we visit a URL without anything on the end of it, I think I had something on the end. Yep, I still had R on the end. If we visit a URL without anything on the end of it, we are successfully calling anything inside of this get function right here. So we're saying render the index page, the index view, with a title of registration. But that's not what we want to register. That's not what we want to react to. We want to react to what happens when a user makes a post request to a URL of /register. So in order to do that, we are going to say, actually, let's just go ahead and copy the code that we have right here. We are going to say router.post. This is what happens when we are reacting to a post request with a URL of register, like so. So right now we're saying when we make a post request to register, we are rendering the exact same page that we were on. But let's go ahead and change this to registration complete. So that way when we fill out the form, we should be able to change this title to registration complete instead. So let's go ahead and make sure we're on our route. We are. And let's fill this out really quickly with just some dummy text. Now we are processing what happens when we make a post request to a URL of /register, and as a result, we are rendering registration complete. So this is where we are actually going to be adding our user into a database. This is where we're creating a user so that later on we can authenticate and log our user into our app. So the next step would be, let's go ahead and see where we're at. We've created a form within a view. We've made it look nice with Bootstrap. We've created a route that'll process the form's post request. And we've actually already created a database connection using our .env file. So our app is actually connected, and we can now make queries to our database. We just need some data that's actually within our database in the first place. So the next step is going to be to actually grab our form input and insert it into the database. And once we've tested that we are successfully inserting data into the database, we are then going to delete the data, the dummy data that we're putting in there, and we're going to add validation to ensure that we're only getting the exact input that we expect to get. We want to make sure that we're not getting blank usernames or usernames that match up with other usernames that are already in our database. So we want to make sure that we're validating our data, only uploading exactly what we expect to our database. So let's go ahead and end that here. There's still a little, I won't say a little, still quite a bit more to go. And like I said, there's quite a bit that goes into authenticating a user in the first place. But if there's anything I want you to take away from this lesson, it is that all authentication is we're proving that we own a particular account. We're comparing what we have here within username, email, password fields. We're comparing them with what is available within the database. And if we find a match within the database, we are then declaring to our app, okay, this user is authenticated, so therefore let them access individual pages that they might not have access to otherwise, and also give them access to data that is specific to their account. That is what authentication is. That's all I want you to remember. And in order to do that, we are going to follow all of the steps over here. We're already on our way to creating a new user in the database, which we need to compare with our form fields over here. We are then going to log the user in using Passport. And then we're going to protect our routes and create any functionality that we might need in order for a user-based app to work. So that's going to be it for this episode, folks. And I'm going to get the next one out as soon as I can. I'm really excited for this one. I spent a lot of time researching how to do this correctly, all the use cases that might go into this to ensure that we have a secure app that works and that is scalable in the process. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Later.